Hello, and welcome to Mom's Clean Air Force's national series of conversations about clean air, climate, health equity, and inequity. Today's program is focused on soot and our health. My name is Almita Cooper, and I'm the National Manager for Health Equity at Mom's Clean Air Force. At Mom's Clean Air Force, we're about 1.5 million moms, dads, and caregivers who are focused on protecting children's health and clean air. We are committed to identifying common sense solutions to environmental injustice and health inequities, like soot and health. Quick level set. Soot is the common name for air pollution, which consists of tiny droplets or particles in the air. It's also called particle pollution, or PM2.5. You can think of these tiniest of particles as micro-soot. They are 30 times smaller than the width of a human hair, so they are easily inhaled and can get into our lungs or our bloodstream. They are dangerous for our health. Soot particles come from burning fuel for energy, such as industrial plants or vehicle emissions. Our panel today includes Dr. Mozhgon Rajee, who is an associate professor of public health at Oakland University. Ms. Kailey Kanaziz, who is a registered nurse in Northern Michigan, and she's also active with the Michigan Clinicians for Climate Action and the Alliance of Nurses for Healthy Environments. And last, we have Reverend Morgan Foreman, who is a community leader and an advocate for communities of color. She's also the Constituent Services Director for State Representative Felicia Brabeck in the Michigan House of Representatives. You can learn more about our impressive panel by viewing their bios on Mom's Clean Air Force's website. Asking questions today are Marcel Simmons, Lauren Schaffner, and Professor Deirdre Courtney Neves. Our first question is from Lauren Schaffner.
Hi, my name is Lauren Schaffner. I'm a student at Michigan State University in East Lansing, Michigan, where I study environmental studies and sustainability. I'm currently employed at the state of Michigan working on remediation redevelopment projects, which have opened my eyes to the importance of case-by-case prosecution of environmental pollution. I want to know about the human connection between human health, climate change, and health equity, because it's important in the environmental justice movement, which is a necessary pillar in our work to battle climate change. Air pollution disproportionately affects people of color and low-income communities. What tools does the environmental justice movement bring to the table to address how air pollution affects some communities more than others?
Yeah, so I'll take that question. So that's a great question. So you're absolutely right. Pollution and environmental hazards most certainly disproportionately affect people of color and low-income communities. This subsequently makes these groups much more vulnerable to the short and long-term negative health effects that come with exposure to pollution, such as more exacerbations of chronic heart and lung disease, more emergency room visits and hospital admissions, and premature death and shortened life expectancy. So it is important to understand that, environmental justice and health disparities are two sides of the same coin. So what tools does the EJ movement bring to the table to address these inequities? Before I answer this, I do want to acknowledge I do not reside in an area most impacted by environmental injustice. So my answers do not reflect a personal experience with this topic, rather my experience with engaging with policymakers in general, and my understanding of the social determinants of health as a nurse. So I'd say the most crucial tool you have to bring to the table is the voices of those who are most affected by inequitable practices and policies. It is impossible to have a conversation about and make decisions about a community without the full participation of the folks who will be affected by that policy. So engaging these community members in the decision-making process of any and all policies that affect them, that is fundamental, and that is the whole premise of environmental justice. Secondly, data and numbers are, of course, an important tool to bring to the table because numbers don't lie. The CDC, the EPA, and your state health department website are all places that you can get, valuable data that really illustrates the disproportionate toxin exposure and poor health outcomes among marginalized and vulnerable groups. And there's a large body of scientific research out there as well. There's several interactive online data tools out there that you can use in your work. For example, the Environmental Justice Index tool on the CDC website that just allows you to kind of examine the relationship between environmental burdens and health outcomes over time. So these tools can be used to kind of contextualize environmental justice concerns, and they can serve as an aid to inform policy. However, data is only a piece of the puzzle. So that brings me to our lived experience as a tremendously important tool. Facts are important, of course, but there's enormous power in your story in sharing with policymakers how you personally have been impacted by environmental injustices. That holds a lot of weight, and that puts a face to the problem. Every single community is unique, right, regarding their strengths and weaknesses. But we know our communities best, and we're able to identify where improvements need to be made and how certain aspects of our community are harming our most vulnerable residents. And so bringing that perspective to the table is essential. So your presence, your stories, and data are all important. And I want to say here too, you don't have to do this work alone. There's so much value in joining existing groups and organizations because, as I mentioned, there's power in numbers, and there's so much to be learned from those who have been doing this advocacy work for a long time. So, being open to leaning on each other for support and knowledge sharing is so valuable.
Great. Thank you for that answer. Now, let's go to the next question.
I am highly concerned about air pollution from an industrial standpoint, as I grew up near Dow Chemical and my parents are employed in the agriculture and car industry. What will it mean for industries that millions of Americans are currently employed with, as a transition is necessary for health equity and clean air?
So my mom was actually a CNC machinist, and I know the significance of industry in our economies, especially in Michigan. And I think there are a couple of things that have to happen. One is we need industries to adapt to better standards, better air quality standards. They need to improve their technology, and they need to cut emissions. Industry can be the champions opposing new rules and standards sometimes, and we need to hold them accountable to not spread misinformation, especially when you have this conflict of interest with jobs, that we understand what the benefits are of these new health standards. The second piece is that we need a cleaner industry that supports a more livable future for everyone, not just those who can afford it. And so this is where I think we need government support to help that transition. I think that's a key component. And we need companies and government and individuals and communities to work together to advocate for that type of change. And particularly when we talk about climate change and issues from climate change, we have to figure out ways to move away from the petrochemical industry and fossil fuels that are only going to contribute to poor air quality.
Thank you, Mozhgon. Now let's hear from Marcel.
My name is Marcel Simmons. I have lived in Flint, Michigan all of my life. And as you know, it already has the damage done by the Flint water crisis and already the air pollution damage from General Motors. I am a EJ ambassador now who has asthma and suffers from a weak immune system. Because this is a health crisis and the lives of human beings are being affected and the people are dying. Will there be any action taken against those who are not abiding by the new ruling? Are we not tired of this yet? Will the people's lives who have died on paper not be meant for something?
Mozhgon, I think that's also a question that you would be suited to answer.
Yeah, I mean, this is a question that I think really echoes how a lot of us feel. We want accountability and change because we're seeing all these unjust things. I'm anticipating that when these rules change to whichever the standard is, we hope lower levels of air pollution. A lot more people are going to be living in areas that don't meet the national ambient air quality standards for fine particulate matter soot. And I think the one good thing about that is that's how people are currently living and have been living. And it's a way to also acknowledge and see, yes, this is really a problem. It's a verified problem because it's above a standard now. The tricky part and the difficulty of many of the problems you articulated is that when we talk about changing a standard like the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, it's a standard for air quality, not on the polluters or the emitters. So the National Ambient Air Quality Standard for fine particulate matter has to come with a host of other standards that hold polluters accountable. The proposed rule does note, the Good Neighborhood Plan, air pollution regulation for oil and gas industries, on methane, on transportation, and other things. And all of those things need to be updated, or policies around all those things have to be updated and implemented in order for us to breathe cleaner air. So this has to happen in conjunction with other policy changes. And we'll be discussing this issue of how we hold people accountable, companies accountable, and organizing towards the end.
Thank you. Now let's hear a question from Professor Courtney Neves.
My name is Deirdre Courtney Nieves, and I am a professor of environment and sustainability and anthropological studies, and the director of climate solutions at West Michigan Environmental Action Council, also known as WEMIAC. Soot is a dangerous and deadly pollutant that disproportionately harms communities of color and overburden communities specifically in Detroit, where I was born and raised, and Kalamazoo, where I now teach as a professor. As a woman of color and professor who is teaching students that soot pollution disproportionately impacts Americans, minorities, and low-income Americans, my question is, what is your suggestion, or what do you think that I can do as an individual to ensure that the EPA is working to strengthen stronger pollution standards in order to protect those most vulnerable and the overall public health?
I'll answer that question. So my answer to this is to advocate. The way to strengthen your need for something from a political entity or bureaucracy is to be organized. And that organization starts locally. So you can start in your neighborhood club, your neighborhood association, your community, your church, and you can start there and begin to organize. And from there, your organization turns into advocacy. So you want to learn who your legislators are on your state level, know who your city council people are, county commissions, township supervisors, township boards. I used to be on the brownfields board here, so I did work in remediation. And so that's something that you would want to know. And relevant committees of legislators across the state, or however yours, like the state of Michigan, how we work here, we have the two chambers, we have the House, and then we have the Senate, and who's on those committees, and talk to those people. National advocacy happens when you're organized enough to take your local electeds can take your request to your congresswomen and congressmen and your senators. And so I say advocate. The best way to try to strengthen pollution standards and affect change is to organize and advocate. Agencies like the EPA are massive bureaucracies, and one voice can easily get lost or go unnoticed. It doesn't mean that they don't care. Collective voices can also, of course, go to your local officials and cause them to advocate and champion on behalf of our issues. Collective voices are often organically grown from advocacy into movements, and movements are what changes policy, and policy is what changes the world.
Now let's hear another question from Professor Neves.
What ideas do you have for college students to get involved or take actions to ensure that their elected representatives are using their power to communicate and push for stronger soot pollution standards?
This is a question that I think is well suited for you, Kailey.
Yeah. So I love this question because I think that the academic experience can really be enhanced by civic engagement and social awareness. And my involvement with climate change started as an undergrad college student. So, at the end of the day, holding our representatives accountable is our job as constituents. I think college students can get involved in a variety of ways. I think one of the most important things for students and everyone to remember is that our legislators work for us, right? So at the individual level, we should be communicating with them to voice our concerns, whether that be with a call to their office, an email, or if you have the opportunity to meet with them or a staffer, it's just important to convey your concerns consistently with your representatives so they know that strong air pollution standards and other environmental concerns are a high priority issue for you. Again, consistent outreach is important to keep this issue on their radar, and their contact information can be found on their website. Secondly, I think a key point here is that there are so many groups out there doing this important advocacy work at the local, state, and federal level. So students shouldn't feel like they have to reinvent the wheel and go at it alone. I think so. Connecting with student organizations on campus or community groups that are advocating for healthier environments is an excellent way to amplify your voice, because there's power in numbers, and you can learn so much from others who have been doing this work for a long time. Oftentimes certain groups have an established relationship with their elected representative. And so it can be a great way to not only engage with like-minded individuals, but also perhaps engage with your reps on a more personal level with meetings. Another way to take action and get your reps to pay attention is to write a letter to the editor or an op-ed in your local newspaper. And there's many great resources online walking you through that if you've never done it before. They're just short pieces that allow you to not only bring an issue to the public's attention, but they're also frequently monitored by our reps to kind of keep a finger on the pulse of what's going on and what's important to the members of the districts that they serve. I think whenever you're communicating with your reps about an issue that matters to you and your community, like these stronger air pollution standards, remember that storytelling is powerful. And so if you're comfortable sharing a personal story of why this problem is so important to you, for example, if you were a family member or living with asthma and having frequent, exacerbations due to poor air quality, that really resonates with folks. And so if you're able to put a personal touch on your message, that will really go far. So in summary, frequent communication with our reps is key. There's several different ways and outlets available to you to make your voice heard. And remember that our reps won't know what our concerns are unless we reach out. So being engaged however you can is critical. I want to add here too that you don't have to be an expert to speak out, right? If you see there's a problem, in this case, pollution standards are not strict enough, you see this problem affecting you and your community, you don't have to have all the answers and you don't have to be an expert to get involved and speak out. And so, this knowledge will come with time, but the real power is in your personal story.
That is really great advice. And I think the combination of answers that we've heard from those two questions that were proposed by Professor Neves really cover everything that anyone can do, whether you're a college student or not. I really want to thank our panel for just great answers to these questions that many of us would have if we had the opportunity to have access to experts like we have today. And now, before we end, I really want to give each of our panelists 1 minute in a kind of a lightning round to tell our viewers what they feel is their most important takeaway about soot and our health. And I'd like to start with you, Mozhgon.
Thanks so much. I think, when it comes to soot and our health, you want the numbers to be as low as possible. And so I think it's really important whenever there are opportunities like we have now, where the EPA is considering lowering those standards, to share your thoughts, encourage the EPA to lower those standards. We really need an outpouring of response, sometimes for there to be change. And so your voice matters. So I would say make your voice heard electronically or verbally, it doesn't matter, and advocate for change, because you might not be a vulnerable person when it comes to health, but someone else is, and they're going to benefit from your voice.
Next, Kailey.
Yeah, so my key points, I would say I want listeners to really take away, again, I want to reiterate that you don't have to be an expert on these topics to get involved, because pollution exposure and other environmental hazards negatively affect all of our health, right, in a variety of ways, with marginalized communities and those with pre-existing conditions being most at risk and disproportionately burdened. What is important is that you're involved in making your voice heard in some capacity. Again, whether that's picking up the phone and calling your rep to give your opinion, or joining an environmental group that interests you, or just signing up for a newsletter, to stay informed. I want listeners to remember that we each bring unique and valuable skills, knowledge, experiences, identities, and perspectives to the table. And in order to make meaningful change, we really need your voice out there and engaging with your policymakers and community, whatever your niche may be, however that looks like for you, because it will make a difference.
And last but not least, Morgan?
So, as a native Southwest Detroiter, I grew up in the shadow of huge oil companies producing massive air pollution. Me and a friend talk about growing up there and going back there now and living somewhere that's less polluted and the burn that you get in your nose. And there are children that are still born in this environment. And nobody can tell me that some of the health issues that I've had, the asthma that I have, the reproductive issues that I have are not related to the pollution that I experienced before I was born. That was pollution that my grandmother experienced and my mother experienced and that I've experienced. And thankfully we moved out of that area, although I miss it. We're back and we're in a less polluted area. But my biggest takeaway is to continue to advocate, continue to organize, and continue to fight for what you want. It's a human right to have fresh air, fresh, clean water, electricity, all of these things that keep getting taken away from us. It's our right, and we shouldn't have to organize around it, but we do. So organize, advocate, get in the faces of power, get in the halls of power, and take it from there and keep going. And when your time is done, pass the baton to someone else.
Thank you today to our panel and to our questioners. And before I leave our viewers today, I have a message to you from Mozhgon Air Force. Let's make sure that we act to reduce soot and particle pollution and its harm to our collective health. Let's invest in pollution reduction because our health is worth it. Don't miss a chance to tell the EPA that soot pollution matters, especially to black and brown and low wealth communities. Right now, you can send a comment by March 28, 2023 to the EPA. And you're not limited to just this time. You can submit a comment every time the standards are reviewed, because this is not a one and done fight to protect our health. You can use our QR code to link to the EPA that it's at the end of this program. Please take action to assure that there is justice in every breath. And please watch for our next conversation regarding clean air, climate, health equity, and inequity.